It was a hot and sticky summer afternoon in the small town of Ridgewood. The kind of day where the air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on everyone just trying to get through their routines. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional hum of an air conditioner or the distant bark of a dog. Officer Greg Miller sat in his patrol car, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel as he drove slowly down Maple Street. He wasn't particularly fond of this part of town. Older houses, cracked sidewalks, and people who didn't seem to belong there, at least not in his eyes. Greg had been with the Ridgewood Police Department for nearly 10 years, but no one could say he was well liked. His co-workers tolerated him because he got results, but they often whispered about how quick he was to judge and how harshly he treated people who didn't look like him. Greg saw the world in black and white, or rather, blue and everything else. To him, being a cop meant having authority, respect, and control, even if that meant bending rules or stepping over lines when it suited him. As he rounded the corner onto Oak Avenue, something caught his attention. A man standing by the curb, washing a car under the blazing sun. The man was older, probably in his late 70s, with graying hair and deep wrinkles etched into his weathered face. He wore faded jeans and a t-shirt that looked like it had seen better days. A bucket of soapy water sat beside him, and a garden, hose snaked across the driveway. It was an ordinary sight, the kind you'd expect on any suburban street, but something about it made Greg's jaw tighten. He slowed the car to a crawl, narrowing his eyes as he studied the man. There was something off about him, Greg thought. Something out of place. For one thing, this neighborhood wasn't exactly known for its diversity. Most of the residents here were white families who had lived in Ridgewood for generations. This black man, didn't fit the picture Greg had in his mind. And why was he washing a car in the middle of the day? Didn't he have anything better to do? Greg parked the car a few feet away and stepped out, slamming the door behind him. His boots thudded against the pavement as he approached the man, his hand resting casually on the holster of his gun. "Hey!" he called out sharply, his voice cutting through the stillness of the afternoon. "What are you doing here?" The man paused mid-scrub, turning to look at Greg. His expression was calm, almost serene, as though he hadn't noticed the tension radiating from the officer. "Just cleaning my car," he said simply, his voice soft but steady. He turned, back to the task at hand, rinsing soap off the hood with the hose. Greg bristled at the dismissive tone. How dare this guy ignore him? He took another step closer, his shadow falling over the man. "This isn't your neighborhood," Greg snapped, his words laced with hostility. "You shouldn't be messing around here." The man straightened, up slightly, meeting Greg's gaze without flinching. "I live right there," he said, pointing to a modest house a few doors down. His voice remained calm, but there was a hint of firmness now, as if he was used to dealing with difficult people. "Been living here for 20 years. Greg's face twisted into a sneer. 20 years? That couldn't be right. If this man had really lived here that long, surely someone would have mentioned it. No, Greg decided. The man was lying. He was probably some drifter, passing through town and causing trouble, or worse, casing the area for potential targets. Without warning, Greg reached down and grabbed the hose from the man's hands. Before the man could react, Greg turned the nozzle to full blast and aimed it directly at him. Cold water sprayed, everywhere, soaking the man instantly. His clothes clung to his body and water dripped down his face, but he didn't move. Instead, he stood there silently, staring at Greg with an unreadable expression. For a moment, Greg felt a surge of satisfaction. This was what happened when people didn't show him proper respect. But then he noticed something strange. The man wasn't angry. In fact, he didn't seem fazed at all. His calm demeanor only fueled Greg's frustration. Why wasn't he yelling? Fighting back? Anything? "Get lost," Greg barked, shoving the hose toward the man before letting go. Water continued to spray wildly, pooling on the ground around them. "And don't let me catch you around here again." The man finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "You'll regret this, son. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday." Then, without another word, he bent down to pick up the hose and turn off the water. He wrung out his shirt as best he could and began gathering his things, ignoring Greg completely. Across the street, Lisa Evans watched the entire scene unfold from her front porch. She had been sitting outside, enjoying the rare breeze, when she heard Greg's raised voice. At first she assumed it was just another argument between neighbors, but when she saw the officer drenching the elderly man, her stomach dropped. What she witnessed left her shaken, not just because of what Greg had done, but because of how casually he seemed to do it. Lisa hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. She knew Greg's reputation all too well. Sticking her nose where it didn't belong could easily make her the next target. Still, she couldn't shake the image of the soaked man standing quietly while Greg loomed over him. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, deeply wrong. When Greg finally drove off, leaving the man dripping and alone, Lisa crossed the street. "Are you okay, sir?" she asked tentatively, approaching him. The man glanced up, offering her a faint smile despite his disheveled appearance. "I'm fine, child. No need to worry." Lisa frowned, unconvinced. "That officer, he had no right to treat you like that. Do you want me to call someone? Report him?" The man shook his head, chuckling softly. "No use stirring up trouble. Some people will always see what they want to see, no matter what the truth is." His words puzzled Lisa. Who was this man, really? He didn't act like someone who had just been humiliated in public. If anything, he seemed almost amused. Determined to learn more, she pressed gently. "If you don't mind me asking, how long have you lived here?" "Long enough to know this town inside and out," the man replied cryptically. When Lisa asked for his name, he introduced himself as Henry Jackson. Beyond that, he offered little else, deflecting her questions with polite smiles and vague answers. But Lisa wasn't ready to let it go. Something about Henry intrigued her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. As she walked back to her house, she resolved to dig deeper, not just for her own curiosity, but because she believed everyone deserved justice, especially someone as kind and dignified as Henry. Little did she know, uncovering the truth about Henry Jackson would change not only her perspective, but also the lives of those around her, including Greg Miller's. The next morning, Lisa couldn't stop thinking about Henry Jackson. His calm demeanor after being mistreated by Greg Miller stuck in her mind like a song she couldn't forget. Who was this man? Why did he seem so unfazed by what had happened? And most importantly, why had Greg reacted the way he did? The questions swirled in her head as she sipped her coffee, staring out the window at the quiet street. Lisa wasn't one to sit idly by when something felt wrong. She had always been curious, some might even say nosy, but she preferred to think of herself as someone who cared. If there was injustice in the world, no matter how small, she wanted to do something about it. This time, though, she didn't know where to start. All she had was a name: Henry Jackson. It wasn't much, but it was enough for her to begin digging. After finishing her coffee, Lisa headed to the local library. The Ridgewood Public Library wasn't big or fancy, but it had a wealth of old newspapers, magazines, and records that could be useful if you knew where to look. Lisa spent hours combing through microfiche archives and dusty books, searching for any mention of Henry Jackson. At first, she found nothing, just a few obituaries and wedding announcements with people who shared his last name. Frustrated but determined, she kept going. Finally, late in the afternoon, she stumbled upon something unexpected, a faded newspaper clipping from decades ago. The headline read, "Local Hero Honored for Civil Rights Work." Below it was a black and white photo of a younger Henry Jackson standing beside a group of activists, their arms linked in solidarity. Lisa's heart raced as she read the article. According to the story, Henry had been a prominent civil rights leader in the 1960s, organizing marches and advocating for equality across the country. He had even served as an advisor to national leaders during pivotal moments in history. As Lisa flipped through more pages, she discovered additional articles about Henry. One mentioned him receiving an award for his work in education reform. Another highlighted his role in helping desegregate schools in the South. There were photos of him speaking at rallies, shaking hands with politicians, and meeting with community members. Each piece painted a picture of a man who had dedicated his life to making the world a better place. Lisa couldn't believe what she was seeing. The kind, unassuming man she had met yesterday wasn't just some ordinary resident of Ridgewood. He was a national hero. How could someone like that end up living quietly in their sleepy little town without anyone knowing? And how could Greg Miller, a man sworn to protect and serve, treat him with such disrespect? Determined to confront Greg, Lisa printed out several of the articles and headed straight to the police station. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked inside, unsure of how this conversation would go. She had never spoken directly to Greg before, and based on everything she'd heard about him, she wasn't looking forward to it, but she knew she had to try. When she arrived, Greg was sitting at his desk scrolling through his phone. He looked up when he saw her approach, his expression shifting from boredom to irritation. "What do you want?" he asked gruffly, clearly not pleased to see her. "I need to talk to you," Lisa said firmly, placing the stack of papers on his desk. "About what happened yesterday." Greg glanced at the papers but didn't touch them. "I don't have time for this," he muttered, turning back to his phone. "You should make time," Lisa shot back, her voice rising slightly. "Because what you did was wrong. Do you even know who that man is?" Greg rolled his eyes. "Some guy washing his car where he shouldn't be. Big deal." "No, it's not just some guy," Lisa snapped, sliding the top article toward him. "His name is Henry Jackson. Does that mean anything to you?" Greg picked up the paper reluctantly, skimming over the headline and photo. At first he looked skeptical, but as he read further, his face began to change. His eyes widened and his jaw tightened. "Wait, this can't be the same guy," he muttered, flipping through the other articles Lisa had brought. "It is," Lisa said quietly. "And you humiliated him in front of everyone. You drenched him with a hose because of the color of his skin, and now you're sitting here acting like it's no big deal." Greg stared at the papers, his hands trembling slightly. He hadn't expected this. Sure, he'd heard rumors about Ridgewood having a few notable residents over the years, but he never imagined someone like Henry Jackson would actually live there. A civil rights icon? An advisor to presidents? It sounded impossible. This changes things," Greg stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. For the first time in a long time, he looked genuinely shaken. "It should," Lisa replied sharply. "You need to fix this. Apologize to him. Make things right." Greg nodded slowly, still processing everything. He didn't know what to say or how to feel. Part of him wanted to deny it, to insist that Lisa must be mistaken, but deep down he knew she was telling the truth. The evidence was right in front of him, and the weight of what he had done was starting to sink in. That evening, Greg drove to Henry's house, his mind racing with thoughts and emotions. He had rehearsed what he would say 100 times in his head, but none of it felt adequate. How do you apologize to someone you've wronged so deeply? Someone who had accomplished more in his lifetime than Greg could ever hope to achieve. When he arrived, he parked his car and sat there for a moment, staring at the modest home. Lights glowed softly in the windows, and the sound of laughter drifted faintly from inside. Taking a deep breath, Greg forced himself to get out of the car and walk up to the door. He knocked hesitantly, half expecting Henry to slam it in his face. His surprise, Henry answered almost immediately. He looked surprised to see Greg standing there, but he didn't seem angry. Instead, he simply stepped aside and gestured for Greg to come in. The inside of the house was warm and inviting, filled with books, photographs, and mementos from Henry's past. Greg recognized some of the faces in the pictures from the articles Lisa had shown him. They were famous figures, presidents, activists, and leaders, all smiling alongside Henry. It made Greg feel even smaller than he already did. "I came to apologize," Greg blurted out, his voice cracking slightly. "For what I did yesterday. I didn't know who you were. I didn't realize." Henry held up a hand, silencing him. "Sit down, son," he said gently, motioning to a chair. Greg obeyed, sinking into the seat as Henry took a spot across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Henry leaned forward, studying Greg with a thoughtful expression. "Tell me, young man," he began, his voice calm but firm. "Why did you act the way you did yesterday?" Greg swallowed hard, avoiding Henry's gaze. I don't know. I guess I thought you didn't belong here. That you were up to something. And why would you think that? Henry pressed. Because Greg hesitated, struggling to find the words. Because of how you look. Because of your skin color. Henry nodded slowly as if he had expected this answer. You see, that's the problem, he said. People like you, and I don't mean just you personally, people like you let fear dictate their actions. Fear of what they don't understand. Fear of those who are different. And when we act out of fear, we hurt others. Greg hung his head, unable to meet Henry's eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered. I don't know what else to say. Henry sighed softly, leaning back in his chair. Apologies are important, son, but they're only the beginning. What matters is what you do next. Will you keep letting fear guide you, or will you choose to learn, to grow, to see the world differently? Greg didn't answer right away. He sat there, absorbing Henry's words, feeling the weight of his own mistakes pressing down on him. Finally, he looked up, tears glistening in his eyes. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he admitted. But if you'll give me a chance, I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Henry smiled faintly, a hint of warmth returning to his expression. Forgiveness isn't given because it's deserved, he said. It's given so we can move forward. So both of us can heal. Greg nodded, overwhelmed by a mix of guilt, gratitude, and determination. As he left Henry's house that night, he knew his life would never be the same. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time he felt ready to face it. The days following Greg's visit to Henry's house were unlike any he had experienced before. For years, Greg had gone through life with a rigid mindset, convinced that his way of seeing the world was the only correct one. But now, everything felt different. Every interaction, every decision, every thought seemed to carry extra weight. He couldn't stop thinking about what Henry had said. What matters is what you do next. Those words echoed in his mind constantly, pushing him to reflect on who he was and who he wanted to become. At first, Greg wasn't sure where to start. Apologizing to Henry had been hard enough, but making real changes in his behavior felt like climbing a mountain without a clear path. Still, he knew he couldn't just go back to the way things were. The guilt of what he'd done, and the realization of how much harm he might have caused over the years, was too heavy to ignore. One of the first steps Greg took was reaching out to Lisa Evans. After all, she was the one who had shown him the truth about Henry. At first, Greg hesitated to contact her. He assumed she wouldn't want anything to do with him after witnessing his cruel treatment of Henry. But when he finally mustered the courage to call her, Lisa surprised him by agreeing to meet. They sat together at a small cafe downtown, sipping coffee, as Greg nervously explained why he had asked to see her. I know I messed up, he began, his voice shaky. And not just with Mr. Jackson. I've treated a lot of people poorly because of ignorance, because of fear. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm trying to change. I need help figuring out how. Lisa studied him. For a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. It's good that you're willing to admit your mistakes, she said. But talking about change isn't enough. You have to prove it with your actions. Greg nodded eagerly. That's why I'm here. I don't know where to start, but I'll do whatever it takes. Over the next few weeks, Lisa became something of a guide for Greg. She introduced him to books, documentaries, and podcasts about racism, inequality, and social justice. Some of the material was difficult for Greg to digest. It challenged many of the beliefs he had held for most of his life. But he forced himself to keep going. He attended community meetings, listened to stories from people whose experiences were vastly different from his own, and volunteered at local shelters and food banks. Slowly but surely, he began to see the world through new eyes. Meanwhile, Henry continued living his quiet life, seemingly unaffected by the events that had unfolded. He spent his days tending to his garden, reading books, and occasionally mentoring young activists like Lisa. Though he didn't seek attention or recognition, Word of his past accomplishments began to spread throughout Ridgewood. People started recognizing him at the grocery store or during evening walks, often stopping to thank him for his contributions to society. Henry always responded with humility, brushing off their praise and insisting that he was simply doing his part. Despite his outward calm, however, Henry couldn't deny that Greg's apology had stirred something within him. It wasn't anger or bitterness, he had long since let go of those emotions, but rather a sense of cautious hope. Maybe, just maybe, Greg's willingness to confront his mistakes signaled a shift, not just in him, but in others like him. If one person could change, perhaps others could too. One afternoon, Lisa visited Henry again, this time bringing along a stack of flyers advertising an upcoming town hall meeting focused on racial equality and community unity. "I thought you might be interested," she said, handing them to him. "We're hoping to bring everyone together, young, old, black, white, to talk about these issues openly." Henry smiled warmly, flipping through the flyers. "This is important work, child," he said. "But remember, true progress doesn't happen overnight. It requires patience, persistence, and a lot of listening." "I know," Lisa replied, "but having someone like you involved would mean so much. People respect you. They listen to you." Henry chuckled softly. "You give me too much credit. But if my presence can encourage even one person to think differently, then I suppose I should attend." True to his word, Henry showed up at the town hall meeting, which was held in the basement of the local church. The room buzzed with energy as residents of all ages and backgrounds gathered to share their thoughts and experiences. When it was Henry's turn to speak, the crowd fell silent, hanging on to his every word. He spoke about his journey as an activist, the challenges he had faced, and the lessons he had learned along the way. "Change begins with understanding," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "We must be willing to step outside our comfort zones, to hear perspectives that differ from our own, and to acknowledge the pain we may have caused, even unintentionally. Only then can we begin to heal." As he spoke, Greg sat quietly in the back of the room, listening intently. Hearing Henry address the crowd reinforced everything Greg had been learning over the past few weeks. It also reminded him of how far he still had to go. After the meeting ended, Greg approached Henry once more, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. "Thank you," Greg said sincerely, "for speaking tonight, for everything. I know I'll never fully understand what it's like to walk in your shoes, but I promise I'll keep trying." Henry placed a hand on Greg's shoulder, his touch light yet meaningful. "That's all anyone can ask of you, son. Keep moving forward, one step at a time." Word of Greg's transformation began to spread throughout Ridgewood. At first, many were skeptical. How could someone who had acted so cruelly suddenly claim to be a changed man? But as Greg continued attending meetings, volunteering and engaging with the community, some began to soften their stance. Not everyone forgave him immediately, some never would, but enough people saw his efforts as genuine to give him a second chance. Even Officer Greg Miller's colleagues at the police department noticed a difference. Where once he had been abrasive and quick to judge, he now approached situations with patience and empathy. He made an effort to connect with residents, especially those from marginalized communities, and worked tirelessly to rebuild trust where it had been broken. His superiors took note of his progress, praising him for taking responsibility for his actions and striving to improve. For Lisa, watching Greg's evolution was both rewarding and humbling. She had never imagined that confronting him about Henry's identity would lead to such profound change, not just in Greg, but in herself as well. Through her involvement in organizing community events and advocating for equality, she discovered a passion for activism she hadn't known she possessed. And through her friendship with Henry, she gained wisdom and perspective that enriched her life in countless ways. As autumn arrived, painting the streets of Ridgewood in shades of gold and crimson, the town began to feel different. Conversations that once centered on division and distrust shifted toward unity and collaboration. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other before now greeted one another warmly. Children played together in parks without regard for race or background. While there was still work to be done, the seeds of change had been planted, and they were starting to grow. One crisp October morning, Greg found himself standing beside Henry and Lisa at a community cleanup event. Together, they picked up trash along the riverbank, laughing and chatting as they worked. For a brief moment, Greg paused, looking around at the diverse group of volunteers surrounding him. He realized how far he had come since that fateful day, when he had drenched Henry with a hose. Back then, he had seen the world in black and white. Now he understood that life was far more colorful and far more beautiful than he had ever imagined. Henry caught Greg's gaze and offered him a knowing smile. No words were exchanged, but none were needed. In that moment, they both knew that while the journey ahead would still require effort, they were moving in the right direction. And sometimes, that was enough. As winter approached, Ridgewood began to settle into a rhythm of quiet progress. The town wasn't perfect. There were still whispers of tension and moments of misunderstanding, but the seeds of change planted by Henry, Lisa, and even Greg were starting to take root. People talked more openly about their differences, shared meals with neighbors they had once ignored, and worked side by side on projects meant to improve the community. It was slow, steady work, but it was happening. For Greg Miller, the transformation wasn't just external, it was deeply personal. Every day felt like a test of his resolve. At first he struggled to break old habits. There were times when instinct made him react harshly, or judge someone too quickly, only for him to catch himself mid-action and force a different response. He knew he couldn't undo years of behavior overnight, but he was determined not to give up. Each small victory, whether it was offering a kind word to a resident or resisting the urge to escalate a situation, felt like proof that he was on the right path. One of the biggest challenges Greg faced was rebuilding trust within the police department. Many of his fellow officers had seen his apology to Henry and his subsequent efforts as signs of weakness rather than growth. Some mocked him behind his back, calling him soft or accusing him of trying to win favor with the public. Others simply avoided him altogether, unwilling to associate with someone who had admitted fault so publicly. But Greg refused to let their opinions derail him. Instead, he focused on leading by example. When tensions flared during traffic stops or neighborhood disputes, he stepped in to de-escalate situations calmly. He encouraged his colleagues to listen more and assume less, reminding them that their job wasn't just about enforcing laws, it was about serving people. Over time, a few officers began to follow his lead, though many remained resistant. Outside of work, Greg threw himself into volunteering. He joined Lisa and Henry at community events, helped organize fundraisers for local charities, and spent weekends mentoring at-risk youth. These activities weren't always easy for him. He often felt out of place among people whose lives were so different from his own. But he reminded himself that discomfort was part of the process. If he wanted to truly understand others, he had to step outside his comfort zone and stay there. Lisa noticed how much Greg had grown over the months. She still remembered the angry, defensive man she had confronted at the police station, and seeing him now, humbling himself, reaching out to strangers, and working tirelessly to make amends, filled her with a mix of pride and hope. She knew Greg's journey wasn't complete, and she doubted it ever would be. Change was ongoing after all. But she also knew that his willingness to keep trying mattered more than perfection. Henry, too, saw the difference in Greg. While he never sought recognition or praise for his role in sparking Greg's transformation, he couldn't deny feeling a sense of satisfaction. Watching someone confront their flaws and strive to do better reminded him of why he had dedicated his life to activism in the first place. Change was possible, even in the unlikeliest of places. Despite everything Greg was doing to improve himself, he couldn't escape the weight of his past actions. Some residents of Ridgewood still viewed him with suspicion, refusing to believe that he had truly changed. One cold December evening, this reality hit him hard. Greg was walking home from the grocery store when he passed a group of teenagers standing near the park. They were laughing and joking, clearly enjoying each other's company. As he walked by, one of them, A young black boy no older than 16 recognized him and froze. His friends noticed and fell silent, their eyes narrowing as they stared at Greg. "Hey, isn't that the cop?" one of them muttered loud enough for Greg to hear. The word stung, but Greg forced himself to stop and face them. "Yeah, that's me," he said, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "I know I've done things in the past that hurt people, things I'm not proud of, but I'm trying to be better. I hope someday you'll see that." The boy looked skeptical, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "Why should we believe you?" It was a fair question, one Greg didn't have an easy answer to. "You don't have to," he admitted. "All I can do is keep showing up, keep working to earn your trust. That's all any of us can do." For a moment no one spoke. Then the boy shrugged and turned away, signaling to his friends that the conversation was over. Greg watched them walk off, feeling a mix of frustration and determination. He couldn't blame them for doubting him. Trust wasn't something that could be demanded. It had to be earned piece by piece. Later that night, Greg stopped by Henry's house to share what had happened. Henry listened quietly, nodding occasionally as Greg recounted the encounter. When Greg finished, Henry leaned back in his chair and studied him thoughtfully. "You handled that well," Henry said finally. "Not everyone will forgive you, Greg. Not everyone will even give you a chance. But the fact that you're willing to stand there and face them, to admit your mistakes and ask for understanding, that's what matters." Greg sighed, running, a hand through his hair. "Sometimes it feels like I'll never be able to make up for what I've done." "No one expects you to erase the past," Henry replied gently. "What they, and you, need to focus on is the future. Are you becoming the person you want to be? Are you making choices that align with the values you're learning? If the answer is yes, then you're heading in the right direction." Those words stayed with Greg long after he left Henry's house. They became a sort of mantra, guiding him through moments of doubt and discouragement. Whenever he felt overwhelmed by the enormity of his task, he reminded himself that change was a journey, not a destination. Around the same time, Lisa found herself reflecting on her own growth. Helping Greg and working alongside Henry had opened her eyes to the power of persistence and compassion. She realized that fighting for justice wasn't just about grand gestures or dramatic victories. It was about showing up every day, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. It was about believing in the possibility of change, even when it felt distant. Her commitment to activism deepened as she took on new responsibilities. She started organizing workshops at the library, inviting speakers to discuss topics like systemic racism, allyship, and community building. She reached out to schools, encouraging teachers to incorporate lessons about equality and empathy into their curriculums. And she continued mentoring young people, helping them find their voices and channel their energy into positive action. Through it all, Lisa relied heavily on Henry's guidance. His wisdom and patience inspired her to keep pushing forward, even when progress felt slow. One snowy afternoon, as they sat together drinking tea, she thanked him for everything he had taught her. "I don't think I'd have the courage to do half of what I'm doing if it weren't for you," she said earnestly. "You've shown me that change is possible even in the smallest ways." Henry smiled, his eyes twinkling with warmth. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, child. It's the decision to act despite it. You've had that courage inside you all along. I've just helped you see it." By the time spring returned to Ridgewood, the town felt lighter somehow. The air buzzed with a renewed sense of possibility, as if the collective effort of its residents had begun to thaw the frost of division that had lingered for so long. Community gardens flourished, art projects brought color to forgotten corners, and weekly gatherings fostered connections between people who might otherwise never have crossed paths. Greg, Lisa, and Henry stood at the heart of it all, not as leaders but as participants in a shared mission. They weren't heroes or saviors. They were simply individuals committed to making their world a little brighter. And while the road ahead would undoubtedly hold challenges, they faced it together, knowing that the smallest acts of kindness and understanding could ripple outward, touching lives in ways they might never fully comprehend. In those moments, as laughter echoed through the streets and smiles replaced scowls, it was clear that Ridgewood was changing, not because of one person, but because of many. And perhaps that was the most beautiful part of all, the realization that true progress came not from singular heroes, but from communities coming together, one step at a time. As spring deepened in Ridgewood, the town seemed to breathe easier. The trees sprouted fresh green leaves, flowers bloomed along sidewalks, and the air carried a sense of renewal that mirrored the changes happening within its people. For Greg, Miller, Lisa Evans, and Henry Jackson, this season marked not just the arrival of warmer weather but also the culmination of months of effort that had brought them closer to one another and to their shared goal of creating a better community. Greg had come a long way since that humid summer afternoon when he drenched Henry with a hose. His journey hadn't been easy. Every step forward had been accompanied by moments of doubt, frustration, and resistance. But now, as he stood on the steps of the local library at the start of a new community event, he felt a quiet pride in how far he'd come. He wasn't the same man who had let fear and prejudice dictate his actions. He was learning to see people, not as threats or stereotypes, but as individuals with stories, struggles, and dreams. The event was organized by Lisa, who had worked tirelessly over the past few weeks to pull it together. It was called Ridgewood Together, a day dedicated to celebrating diversity and fostering unity. There were booths set up showcasing art, music, and food from different cultures, workshops on empathy and communication, and performances by local talent. The turnout was impressive, with families of all backgrounds filling the park where the event was held. Laughter filled the air, children ran around playing games, and conversations buzzed with energy. Henry arrived early, dressed casually in a light sweater and slacks. He moved through the crowd with ease, greeting people warmly and sharing stories about his life. Many attendees recognized him from previous events and approached him to express gratitude for his guidance and inspiration. Henry listened patiently, offering kind words and encouragement. To those who thanked him for being a role model, he simply smiled and said, "We're all learning together." Lisa spotted Henry near the stage and hurried over to join him. "This is amazing," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "I can't believe how many people showed up." "It's because they care," Henry replied. "People want to connect, to understand each other. All they need is an opportunity." Lisa nodded, glancing around at the lively scene. "And you've given so many of us that opportunity. I don't know what we'd do without you." Henry chuckled softly. "You give me too much credit, child. This is your doing. You've brought everyone together." Before Lisa could respond, Greg appeared, looking slightly nervous but determined. "Mr. Jackson," he began, addressing Henry respectfully, "can I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course," Henry said, gesturing for Greg to follow him to a quieter spot near the edge of the park. When they were alone, Greg took a deep breath and spoke. "I just wanted to say thank you, again, for everything. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't have realized how much work I needed to do, or how much good there is in this world if you're willing to look for it." Henry studied Greg for a moment, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done the hard work, Greg. I may have pointed you in the right direction, but you're the one who walked the path, don't forget that." Greg nodded, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "I won't, and I'll keep walking it, no matter how tough it gets." Satisfied with Greg's determination, Henry returned to the main area of the park, leaving Greg to reflect on his words. As Greg watched the festivities unfold, he noticed a young boy, a familiar face from the group of teenagers he'd encountered months earlier, standing nearby with his family. The boy hesitated before approaching Greg cautiously. "Hey," the boy said, his voice uncertain. "I just wanted to say, I saw you helping Mr. Jackson set up earlier. That was cool." Greg blinked, surprised by the unexpected compliment. "Thanks," he said, smiling faintly. "I'm trying to do better. I hope you'll keep holding me accountable." The boy shrugged, a hint of a smile forming on his lips. "We'll see." With that, he turned and rejoined his family, leaving Greg with a renewed sense of purpose. Across the park, Lisa continued overseeing the event, making sure everything ran smoothly. She paused for a moment to take in the scene, the vibrant colors, the laughter, the mingling of diverse groups, and felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. This was what she had hoped for, a space where everyone could come together, celebrate their differences, and find common ground. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, Henry climbed onto the small stage to address the crowd. The chatter died down as people turned their attention to him, eager to hear what he had to say. "Thank you all for being here today," Henry began, his voice steady and warm. "Each of you has contributed something special to this gathering, whether it's your time, your talents, or simply your presence. That means more than you might realize." He paused, scanning the faces before him. Change doesn't happen overnight. It takes patience, persistence, and a willingness to listen, to truly hear what others are saying. But if we commit to walking this path together, even when it's difficult, we can create something beautiful, something lasting. His words resonated deeply with the audience, sparking applause and nods of agreement. When Henry stepped off the stage, Lisa rushed over to hug him. "That was perfect," she whispered. "Just perfect." As the event drew to a close, Greg found himself standing beside Lisa and Henry, watching as families packed up blankets and volunteers cleaned up trash. "Do you think we're making a difference?" Greg asked quietly. "We are," Lisa assured him. "Maybe not everywhere, maybe not for everyone, but here, in this town, absolutely." Henry nodded in agreement. "Progress isn't measured by grand gestures, Greg. It's found in the everyday choices we make, in how we treat our neighbors, how we listen, how we grow. Keep doing that, and you'll leave a mark worth remembering." With those words, the three of them parted ways, each carrying a renewed sense of hope for the future. Greg returned to his patrol car, ready to continue serving his community with humility and respect. Lisa headed home, already brainstorming ideas for the next project she could tackle. And Henry, ever content in his simple life, walked back to his house, pausing briefly to admire the blooming flowers in his garden. Though their paths might diverge at times, the bond they had formed would remain, a reminder that change was possible, even in the unlikeliest of places. Together they had shown Ridgewood that forgiveness, understanding, and unity weren't just ideals to strive for. They were realities that could be achieved, one small act of kindness at a time. And as the sun set over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the town, it was clear that Ridgewood was no longer the same place it had been. It was brighter, warmer, and more connected, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and community.